My daughter told her friends, "The old man won't notice if we use his card." But the fraud department called me first. I noticed the change before I understood it. It was small, the kind of thing most people would ignore, but at my age, little things stand out. I had lived alone long enough to recognize when the rhythm of my house shifted. That morning it felt as if someone had moved a piece of my life a few inches to the left. I was 64 and living quietly in a suburb outside Guelph. After my wife passed, the house felt larger than it needed to be, so I kept my routine simple. I paid my bills on time, cooked the same handful of meals, and used one credit card for almost everything. I kept that card in the top drawer of my desk, the one that held the everyday items anyone might reach for. Pens, batteries, old chargers, and that card tucked under a folded notepad. Nothing fancy, nothing hidden, just the kind of place a family member might open without thinking. My daughter Lily came and went depending on how stable her life was. She was 23 and drifting through part-time work, short leases, and friendships that burned out as fast as they began. When things fell apart, she came home, stayed on the small pullout in the spare room, and told me she just needed time to figure things out. I wanted to believe she was getting closer to that, step by step. Some days it felt true. Other days it didn't. I started noticing little warning signs before anything serious happened. An email from my bank about a routine verification check, the kind they send when a transaction looks slightly unusual. A missing paper receipt from a grocery trip I knew I took 2 days earlier. A drawer not fully closed when I walked past the den. Nothing big enough to accuse anyone of, but nothing I could explain away either. They added up quietly, like faint taps on the shoulder. I tried to rationalize it. I told myself the bank message was just their automated system. I told myself I probably misplaced the receipt. I told myself the drawer might have been left open by me, not Lily. At my age, you start questioning your own memory before you question someone you love. It feels safer that way, but something was shifting in the house. A small tension, a sense that someone was moving through my routines and treating them as if they were theirs. I brushed it aside, but it stayed there, steady and patient, waiting for the moment I could no longer ignore it. I did not know it yet, but the moment would arrive soon. And it would arrive through the one thing I always kept steady, my finances. It would reach me before 7 in the morning while I was making coffee, with a call I never expected. The first real sign came from the people my daughter started bringing into my house. It happened gradually, but by the time I noticed, they were already moving through my home as if it belonged to them. Strangers leaving the smell of cheap cologne in my hallway and backpacks dropped wherever they felt like it. They were polite enough on the surface, giving small nods or quick greetings, but there was an energy about them that made my stomach tighten. They acted comfortable too quickly, settling into my kitchen like it was a student lounge. They spoke fast, laughed louder than they needed to, and carried themselves with the kind of confidence you only see in people who have not learned consequences yet. I stood in the doorway one afternoon, watching them talk around the kitchen island. Their voices were low, but not careful. I heard them speak about money in a way that reminded me of young people trying to sound successful. I caught pieces of sentences about wanting something nicer, something newer, something they felt they deserved without having earned it. It was the tone more than the words, a tone that suggested lines did not matter to them. Lily moved between them like she was trying to keep pace, trying to belong, even if it meant pretending she had resources she didn't. I wanted to tell myself it was normal for her age. People in their early 20s often orbit the wrong groups for a while, but the way they looked around my house made me uneasy, a little too curious, a little too familiar. That evening, I heard a drawer slide open in the den. It was the drawer with the chargers, pens, and the card tucked under the notepad. I walked in slowly, not wanting to start anything. Lily was bent over the drawer, pushing things aside with a level of force you don't use when you know what you're looking for. She said she needed a charger. The charger was on the desk in plain view. I watched her hands sift through the items, moving deeper into the drawer than anyone would need to for a simple cable. She took longer than necessary. She kept her eyes down. And when she noticed me in the doorway, her movements changed, as if she suddenly remembered she was supposed to look casual. I didn't say anything. Not then, not the next day either. I told myself she might have been looking for something else she misplaced, something she didn't want to admit she lost. I told myself not to overthink it, but the drawer had been disturbed, and the card no longer sat exactly where I placed it. I pushed the thought away, convincing myself I was being unfair or paranoid. But the truth had already started shifting beneath my feet, whether I was ready to see it or not. The call came before the sun was fully up. I had just set the coffee to brew when the phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. At my age, early morning calls rarely mean anything good. I felt that truth settle into me before I even answered. It was the fraud department from my bank. The representative asked if I could confirm a series of unusual transactions. I listened carefully, waiting for a mistake, some mix-up, anything that would let me breathe again. But every detail pointed directly at my card, the one stored in the drawer Lily had been digging through. There had been several attempts at online stores I had never heard of, all within the span of 1 hour. Small ones first, then a large one close to $2,000. Most had been declined or frozen, but the bank wanted immediate confirmation. The representative spoke calmly, but I could hear the concern underneath, the kind they hide behind a professional tone. I walked to the den as they read the timestamps. I opened the drawer with a sinking feeling I could not push away anymore. The notepad was still there. The pens were still there. The card was not. I stood there with the phone pressed to my ear, staring at the empty space where the card should have been. I told the representative the truth. None of the charges were mine. They marked every attempt as suspicious and froze the card immediately. They explained that the investigation would take a short time, but I would not be held responsible for unauthorized spending. I hung up and stayed by the drawer longer than I needed to. It felt like the room had shifted. The house that usually felt predictable and steady now felt uncertain, as if someone had walked into the part of my life I kept most protected. I tried to make sense of it, but there wasn't much left to question. Lily had been in that drawer. The card was gone. The charges began the same evening she and her friends were in the house. Still, part of me resisted the conclusion. A parent's mind can twist itself into knots trying not to see what is obvious. Maybe she only misplaced it. Maybe one of her friends took it. Maybe it was all some misunderstanding I had not uncovered yet, but the evidence sat in front of me. Missing card, failed transactions, and a drawer that no longer held what it once did. I canceled the card, set the phone down, and tried to breathe through the realization forming in my chest. The truth was no longer a suspicion. It was a trail, clear and direct, leading to the person I least wanted to suspect. I waited until mid-morning before speaking to Lily. I needed the house to feel calm first. I needed my voice to stay steady. If I went in angry, she would shut down, and nothing would come from it except another argument neither of us needed. She was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone with the kind of distracted calm that comes only when someone believes the world is still working in their favor. I asked if she had seen my credit card. I kept my tone light, the way you do when you are giving someone a chance to walk toward the truth on their own. She looked up briefly, shrugged, and said she had no idea what I was talking about. Her voice carried that practiced ease she used whenever she wanted a topic to disappear. I watched her face, not her words. People tell the truth with their eyes before their mouths catch up. Her eyes didn't settle on mine for more than a second. She moved too quickly back to her phone, as if ending the conversation was the same as resolving it. It wasn't anger or guilt. It was avoidance, and avoidance speaks loudly when you know what you're listening for. I didn't push it. Pushing never worked with her. It only made her retreat deeper into whatever corner she thought would keep her safe. So I stepped back, kept the conversation short, and went about my day as if nothing had shifted. In the early afternoon, one of her friends showed up to collect a jacket she had forgotten. She walked into the kitchen without knocking, the way her group always did. She chatted casually, unaware of anything that had happened, unaware of the bank call still echoing in my mind. And then she said something that stopped me cold. She mentioned that Lily had told her I would not notice if they used my card for a few things. She said it breezily, as if repeating a harmless comment. She did not see the way my face changed. She did not notice the silence that followed. She only grabbed her jacket and moved on with her day. But I stood still, letting the weight of those words settle over everything I had tried to deny. Hearing it secondhand hurt more than any direct admission could have. It carried the casual tone of someone who never expected their actions to matter. Someone who felt entitled to take what they wanted because they believed the person they were taking from would stay quiet. That single careless remark removed the last piece of doubt I had been holding onto. But even then I knew I needed proof, not for the police, not for the bank, for myself. Because once I confronted her, whatever came next would change our relationship, and there would be no walking it back. I waited until the house was empty before gathering anything that could help me understand what had been done. I needed clarity, not anger. I needed facts lined up in a way I could look at without emotion blurring them. Otherwise, I risked accusing her with nothing but instinct, and instinct alone wasn't enough for what came next. I sat at my computer and opened my email. There were more messages than I expected. Verification notices from stores I had never visited, each with timestamps that matched the hours Lily and her friends had been in the house. Some were for small amounts, the kind of charges you use to test if a card works. Others were larger, the kind you attempt when you think no one is watching. The pattern was obvious, and seeing it in front of me drained something from my chest. I printed the emails and placed them in a folder. I checked the account summary the bank had updated after freezing the card. There were pending holds, nothing permanent, but enough to show someone had tried multiple times to use the card as if it belonged to them. The bank would reverse everything, they had already told me that, but the damage wasn't financial anymore. It was trust, and trust does not reverse as easily as a transaction. By early afternoon, I realized I needed to understand where I stood legally, not to file anything, not yet, but to know what would happen if this escalated beyond what I could manage alone. The Guelph police station was quiet when I walked in. I spoke with an officer at the front desk and explained that I was dealing with possible family misuse of my credit card. He listened without judgment, the way seasoned officers do when they've heard countless versions of the same story. He told me that without a formal report, it remained a private matter between me and my daughter. He said I should document every transaction, every date, every small detail, and keep it stored in case I ever needed to take the next step. He reminded me that families often try to resolve these problems privately, and that the law allows space for that. He didn't offer solutions beyond that. He didn't point me toward a financial counselor or a mediator. He simply gave me a realistic understanding of my options and left the decision entirely in my hands. I left the station with the folder tucked under my arm. The walk back to my car felt heavier than it should have, not because of the papers, but because of the acceptance settling in. I wasn't dealing with a misunderstanding anymore. I was dealing with a choice my daughter had made, a choice that crossed a line she couldn't pretend she didn't see. When I got home, I placed the folder on my desk and closed the drawer gently. I finally knew what had been done. What I didn't know yet was how Lily would react once she realized I had proof. Lily noticed something was wrong before I said a word. I could see it in the way she moved through the house, a little faster than usual, a little less certain. People can sense when the ground beneath them has shifted, even if no one has pointed it out yet. She kept glancing toward the den whenever she passed it, as if the drawer itself might reveal what she had done. By midday she asked casually if everything was fine with my bank. She tried to say it like a passing comment, but the question hung in the air too heavily. It told me she had already tried the card again and discovered it no longer worked. Her eyes searched my face for any sign that I knew the truth. I gave her nothing. I wanted her to speak first, to see if there was any honesty left to reach for. She grew restless as the day went on. She paced the kitchen more than she cooked in it. She checked her phone repeatedly, waiting for messages that didn't come. I watched her frustration sharpen into worry when she realized the problem wasn't temporary. The frozen card meant something had escalated, and she knew it. Later that afternoon, she approached me with a tone that tried to sound helpful. She said one of her friends might have taken advantage of her, that someone could have used the card without her knowledge. She didn't accuse anyone directly, but she laid out the story carefully, hoping I would accept it without looking too closely. It was a half-truth, and half-truths always reveal more than lies do. She knew what had happened, and she knew why the card no longer worked. She was trying to step away from the responsibility without letting the guilt catch up to her. I listened without interrupting. I watched her hands, her posture, the way she avoided meeting my eyes for more than a moment at a time. Everything about her behavior confirmed what the emails and failed transactions had already told me. She wasn't ready to admit what she had done, but she was terrified I would force the conversation anyway. I didn't, not yet. Pushing her into a confession would only make her defensive, and once she hit that wall, there would be no getting through it. I needed her calm, not cornered. I needed her to hear the truth when I finally laid it out. So I let her speak, let her circle around the story she wanted me to believe, let her pretend her involvement was smaller than it was. Every word she offered only reinforced how deeply she understood the gravity of her choices. By the time evening came, I knew exactly how the next step would unfold. She had shown me her guilt, her fear, and her avoidance. Now it was my turn to decide when to bring the truth into the open, and how to do it in a way that left no room for denial. I waited until the house felt steady, until the afternoon noise had faded, and there was nowhere for either of us to retreat to. It was time. I had delayed long enough, hoping she might come forward on her own, but she wasn't ready for that. I needed to speak before the silence between us turned into something we couldn't repair. She was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in, scrolling through her phone, pretending to be relaxed. I sat across from her and placed the folder of printed emails on the table. The sound of it landing made her look up quickly. I told her that the bank had called, that the card had been flagged, and that several transactions had been attempted. I told her that her friend had mentioned the card in passing, unaware of what had happened. I told her everything I knew, calmly and without raising my voice. At first, her reaction was embarrassment. Her shoulders tightened, and her eyes dropped to the table as though the truth had suddenly become too bright to look at directly. She tried to brush it off, saying she only thought it would be harmless. Then the embarrassment turned to frustration, the kind that happens when someone realizes their excuses are too thin to hold up. She spoke quickly, explaining that things had been hard, that she didn't think I would notice, that she planned to fix it before it became a problem. But frustration gave way to fear the moment she understood the seriousness of what had happened. Not because of me, because of the bank. She realized that unauthorized transactions, even attempted ones, could have become a formal matter if the investigation continued. Her face changed as the reality of that possibility settled over her. She understood with complete clarity how close she had come to consequences she could not undo. I didn't lecture her. Lectures never reached her. She had to face the situation as it stood, plainly and without drama. So I told her the only path forward that made sense. She would repay me for the stress, the trouble, and the temporary freeze on the account, not the bank, but me. And she would complete a budgeting course offered through the community center downtown, something structured enough to give her tools she clearly never learned. She sat there, silent for a long moment, holding the weight of her actions. Then she nodded, not out of defiance or anger, but out of recognition. She knew she had no other option if she wanted to avoid a record, avoid damage that would follow her for years. She agreed to repay every cent, even though the charges had never gone through, because the breach of trust had its own cost. It wasn't the apology I had once hoped she would give, but it was the beginning of accountability. And for the first time in a long while, she understood that the choices she made were hers to own, not mine to clean up. I updated the officer at the station the next morning. I didn't bring the folder with me. I didn't need to. I simply told him that I understood my options and that I was choosing to handle the matter privately. He made a brief note for their records and reminded me that I could come back if things changed. That was all. No judgment, no pressure, just a simple acknowledgement of the path I had chosen. Back at home, the atmosphere shifted. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Lily moved through the house with a quiet determination that hadn't been there in a long time. She didn't hide in her room. She didn't avoid me. She didn't pretend nothing had happened. There was a heaviness in her posture, but also a focus I hadn't seen in her since she was a teenager trying to prove she could stand on her own. Within a few days, she spoke to the manager at a supermarket near the edge of town and picked up extra shifts. Evening hours, weekend hours, whatever she could get. She wrote her hours down in a small notebook so she could calculate exactly what she owed. It wasn't a large sum, not compared to what it could have been, but she treated it seriously. She knew this wasn't about the amount. It was about repairing something she had broken. The payments came slowly, not because she dragged her feet, but because her income was small. Every week or two, she would quietly place a folded piece of paper on the corner of the table with the amount she was returning. She didn't make speeches or excuses. She didn't try to win favor. She simply honored the agreement she had made. The budgeting course at the community center became another step in that commitment. She went every Wednesday evening, sometimes tired after work, sometimes clearly frustrated with herself, but she went. She brought home printouts about saving, tracking expenses, and making long-term plans. She didn't show them to me, but I saw them stacked neatly on her nightstand, used and highlighted. She was trying. For the first time in a long time, she was truly trying. Our relationship didn't heal overnight. Trust doesn't snap back into place like nothing happened. It rebuilds slowly in small pieces through consistent behavior rather than promises. I didn't pretend everything was fine, and she didn't pretend she hadn't caused the damage. We met somewhere in the middle, both aware of the crack between us, both choosing not to widen it. Months later, when the final payment was made, she placed the last envelope on the table without a word. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't praise her. I simply accepted it, the way you accept a long overdue step in the right direction. It wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. The drawer in the den remains the same as always: pens, chargers, notepads. The new card sits there now untouched. Not because I trust without question, but because trust is something I choose to give slowly, carefully, and with both eyes open. And for the first time in a long while, I feel she is doing the same. Thank you for listening to my story on elder vengeance. Please like this story and subscribe to the channel.